Recognize Umbra Walker D01. Recognize the Caleb G D02.
Hi everyone, welcome to episode 3 of Whelmed. Today we are going to be talking about episode 4, Drop Zone. I am everyone's favorite co-host, Caleb. I'm not wearing any capes, I'm not wearing any tights, and I'm here to introduce Rich Howard, a man who is thanking you for the workout, but has to fly.
Hey, thanks for the workout, man. I have to fly. Don't you want to lead, Caleb?
No. How about you?
Not after that Mr. Twister fiasco.
Well, Rich, you did all right. And speaking of doing all right, if you want to tell us how we are doing here on Whelmed, please get a hold of us. You can find us on Twitter at the YJ Files. Email us, whelmedpodcast@gmail.com. And, of course, please visit our website, crashingthemode.com. As I said before, we are here to talk about episode 4 of Young Justice, Drop Zone.
Such clever niños, but you only know half the story. Let me show you the rest.
Rich, I know you are super excited to talk about this episode.
Oh, I'm so excited. This and the next episode both just changed my world, I have to tell you.
Hello, Megan.
The episode's called Drop Zone. We'll see why in a minute. The release date was January 28th, 2011. We're still seeing a weekly release schedule at this point, which was nice for Rich from 5 years ago. The in-episode date, here's the thing that Caleb and I just sussed out, actually. The episode date says, the timestamp on the episode is June 19th. Here's the problem with that. The Independence Day and Fireworks episodes were actually July 4th and July 5th. And the previous episode was in July as well, 17th. So we're pretty sure that this is a typo. It should have been July 19th in the pre-credits scene we'll talk about. And then there's another timestamp 3 days later, July 22nd, in the post-credits timestamp. Yeah, this should be not June, but July. Weird that I hadn't noticed that before. The director of this episode was Christopher Berkeley, and the writer was Andrew R. Robinson. Hats off to you, gentlemen. This was a great episode.
And I would also like to point out that this episode features the voice work of Danny Trejo as Bane, and we also have Arnold Volsu. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. You don't know the name, but he was the Mummy.
Oh, that guy.
Yeah.
He's one of the that guys.
Yes, he's that guy. He is, God, I want to say Cobra Commander, but I know that's a different show.
No, it's just Cobra.
It's just
Cobra with
Cobra.
a K. Oh, God.
Alrighty, so let's get down to business here, Rich. We're delving into shenanigans.
Also, I think that was a Marvel property. Anyway.
We're just going all over the place. Let's get to the mission briefing, Rich. Kick us off here. What happened?
Just in time for your next mission.
Pre-credits. So this is our first introduction to the Young Justice version of Bane, as well as Mammoth, Shimmer, and as we just mentioned, not Cobra Commander. Mammoth and Shimmer are pretty classic Cornerstone Teen Titans villains. Cobra is a classic Batman villain as well as appeared in the Titans as well. But Bane is pretty clearly a Batman villain. And I bring this up because this is kind of our first glimpse of the bigger world, and that's not going to be a villain of the week attacking Happy Harbor, which made me very happy. And we're getting to see a larger DC universe here. So Bane and his minions, they're being held prisoner on Bane's own island. The timestamp says Santa Prisca, so you know that it has to do with Bane. That's where he was held prisoner. That's where he grew up. That's what he took over, and that's where he produces the venom that gives him his super strength. The first scene we see is he's captured by Cobra agents. They're speaking Spanish, which I'll get into in a little bit later, which was fantastic. He is put into a pit to fight Cobra's champion, which turns out to be some scrawny teenager who gets pumped with some kind of purple fluid and then becomes who we then recognize as Mammoth, who is the brother to Shimmer, who you also see in this scene. And Bane loses to Mammoth. I would like to think because Bane was caught off guard, but I'm a Bane fan from the comics, not so much from the movies. That's our pre-credit scene.
And then as we get into the episode proper, we see that the team is heading to Santa Prisca, and we have this nice little flashback moment where Batman is in the cave and actually giving the team a covert mission. Based on the timestamps, it's logical that this is the first mission that Batman is assigning to the team, which is really cool. He is sending them off to investigate what's happening on the island, sharing details that it is ramping up in production, but nothing is shipping out. So he is sending them there covertly to scout and see what is happening and reporting back to him.
Then the team quickly discovers that it's the Cult of Cobra has taken over the island and is creating a serum that is a hybrid of venom and the Blockbuster serum we saw back in episode 1. So again, another nod to like, ooh, there's a bigger picture going on. We're seeing a metaplot, a first few dots of a metaplot happening here, and that it's 3 times as potent and makes the changes permanent. That's obviously what turned Mammoth into Mammoth. And now we know that that's not a temporary situation and that this might be a bigger picture.
And as the team is learning all of these details, we see that there is a little bit of an uncomfortable struggle. The team doesn't have a leader yet. There's another flashback where Batman is basically telling them, decide who's in charge, figure out your leader. Robin is who we assume would be the leader. In Titans, he was very classically the leader. And there's a power struggle here as all these shenanigans are happening. He's trying to take charge, but he's ninja-ing off into the jungle. Wally thinks he should be in charge. They're just going back and forth. They're butting heads as they are being surrounded by and fighting with Bane's agents, Cobra agents, the whole shenanigans.
And then a little while, after some of these internal struggles, it's finally decided appropriately that Kaldur will lead the team. And they manage to come together because Kaldur is a brilliant leader who we will talk about in a minute. Come together to stop Bane, to stop Cobra, and then also to stop the shipment to this mysterious buyer of this Cobra venom, who turns out to be, to my jaw-dropping shock, the most absurd, I would vote, C, possibly D string villain of the DC universe, Sportsmaster, who has been reimagined in some fever dream of geniusness of, I'm assuming Greg Weisman, might have been Brandon Vietti. I don't know, but it's their love child, and I love every moment of Sportsmaster in this entire series.
And that pretty much wraps up the episode. The team is successful in their mission, and the episode actually ends with a scene back in the cave where Batman is lecturing them, but then also praises them for their work. And we will get into that a little bit later as we move on. That's the basics of the mission here for this episode. Let's move right into
feeling the Aster.
There's a lot that Rich loves about this episode. There's a lot that I love about this episode. Rich is chomping at the bit to start talking here. I'm going to make him last a little bit longer just to make him grumpy. Go ahead, Rich.
No, good. Yes, I'm literally hopping up and down in my chair right now. I love almost everything about this episode. I have one thing that kind of gets me, and I'll talk about that in the spoilers, though. Other than that, geez, where do I start? I'll start from the first thing that rocked my world, that got my attention, which is anytime a creative team decides to use real-world languages and subtitles in a show, you've got my attention. It means you care enough to actually incorporate other cultures and languages into your show, to not make weird scenes where you're in some foreign country, yet everyone is somehow speaking English that makes no sense. It's just got an accent, so I guess that counts. I don't know. It just drives me nuts. And when I saw that they take that extra time to get the actors who can speak the language, to write it into to take that extra step to write the actual dialogue in a foreign language in an episode, it helps the verisimilitude. It helps to suspend your disbelief. It really plants the seeds of what we later see in season 1 and season 2 of the race, sex, culture diversity that just exists in the Young Justice universe. It isn't pointed out. Nobody cares. There's one throwaway joke in one episode about a all-female team, but other than that, there's nothing. Batgirl is not a girl hero. She's just a hero, right? And we're starting to see glimpses of that, like, desire to project what really feels like a real world in this show.
And going from that point forward, I think one of the next really awesome things to talk about is Bane himself.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, I love this Bane.
I do too. I think Bane is one of my favorite villains, not my absolute favorite, but definitely up there. I love him as the really brilliant criminal, the tactician, the mob boss. The fact that he has Venom is just second to that.
Yeah.
He knows how to use it as a weapon. That is not what defines him as a villain. And I think we lost that in a lot of versions of him. Bane in the animated series carried that really well because everything in Batman the Animated Series was done really well.
Really well, yeah. That Bane was quite good as well. But this one, I may top it for me, and he's only in one episode, 2 episodes technically, but...
Bane showed up in some of the other DC Animated Universe movies, specifically Doom. He was in there, and he was pretty good in Doom. But still, this version of Bane is really cool because we see him... First off, we see him lose. And seeing someone who is, I'm Bane, I'm the best, go down in a fight just shocks you into paying attention to what's happening. And then we very easily see him manipulating events. We see him setting himself up to succeed at the end. I mean, we just see him be an awesome, awesome character.
Yeah, there's so many little scenes in here with him in it, including at one point when Superboy attacks him. And he doesn't have any venom, right? He's somehow, it's 3 days later after that pre-credit scene, and he's escaped somehow, and they run into him, and they make a deal with Bane, and the enemy of my enemy is my friend situation, which he literally says. But there is a scene in which Superboy attacks him, and he has no venom, and he pulls this wrestling move where he ends up pinning Superboy without any of the venom going on. It was a smart, tactical martial arts move that tells you he is a fighter in a way, like the truest sense of a martial arts combatant, that he pins Superboy with super strength for a short period of time until Superboy gets the leverage and that kind of thing. But you get to see him being Bane. The fact that he fights off Miss Martians, just casually stops her from probing into his mind, tells you that he's got the will and the smarts, the intelligence, the things that he needs to do, the things that he should have from the comics.
And going right from there, let's talk about Superboy in this episode.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I just love Superboy in general.
I know you do.
We've said this before that I am not the biggest fan of Superman, but this version of Superboy, and honestly Superman in this series, I just love. I really absolutely enjoy them because of the story that is written and because of how the characters develop. And honestly, Superboy is just so cool. He's one of my favorite characters in this entire series. One of the points you made while we were preparing for this episode is that with his super hearing, he not only hears Bane's conversation, but also understands him.
Right. Bane's having a conversation with one of his minions as they're tied up to a tree, but they're speaking in Spanish, and Superboy is overhearing the conversation, but you see this little smirk on Superboy's face when Bane makes some comment, and you realize it's not that he's just hearing them. The genomes have apparently programmed him with multiple languages, which means, although it doesn't necessarily come up him speaking them later on, he knows what they're saying, and that takes this Brick character, this brute strength, invulnerability designed character, and gives him an intellectual edge over some of the other characters in the show. It doesn't come up as much because Miss Martian's telepathic link with the rest of the team allows her to translate languages to an extent, but it makes Superboy an interesting, kind of deeper character.
And with that, we have got to go to Robin.
You got Superboy, I get Robin.
I'm just going to back away from the microphone.
Just back away.
Just
back away. Just put the Batarang down. No one gets hurt. Oh my gosh. Robin. In case you didn't know, for some reason, the Dick Grayson Robin is my absolute favorite hero of all time. I love Marvel, I love DC, I love Dark Horse, I've read comics, I literally learned how to read on comics when I was a kid. I know my comics. Dick Grayson, no superpowers, not even Batman, is my favorite. And I was super confused that Robin was not the leader of this team. I'm a huge Titans fan. I'm like, I don't understand what's happening right now. Of course Robin's going to be the leader. I don't even understand a world in which that's not the case. This is, I think, the moment in which I realized these writers love these characters. They didn't make the change that Robin wasn't leader because somebody just didn't like Robin. they thought about the depth of the characters and the character arc that they could create. There is no good reason that Robin should be leader of this team. No good reason. He's trained with Batman one-on-one. He and Batman work quietly. They know what they're doing with each other. They don't have to say anything. And that's been reflected in multiple episodes now where Robin disappears. And in this one literally says, what are you guys doing? Why didn't you just disappear into the shadows of the jungle with me like you should have? And they're all like, thanks for not telling us the plan, jerk, right? It makes perfect sense. He's the most experienced person on the team. But as Calder points out, that's probably the problem. He's the most experienced person on the team. So the fact that they make a decision to have Calder be the leader, it made sense internally for the show. I'm getting chills, guys. I'm serious. It made sense internally for the show. It made sense on the characters. This is the point I was making last episode, where they didn't force the characters to go left instead of right. Right? The characters should go right, but they made them go left. And here, the characters needed to go right, but we wanted them to go left because Robin is usually the team leader. The fact that they went right and made it make sense, and it made sense so much, Calder needs to be the leader of this team. And the reason is because his mentor isn't Batman. His mentor is the king of a giant percentage of the world. He has seen and trained with a man who is used to leading armies. This is the person you need as a leader. And it's another thing they put as another... I'm still getting chills, guys. I'm telling you. Calder has more layers to him than the old Aqualad ever did, the Garth Aqualad. We'll get a whole episode on Calder. He has not just the powers, but he has the charisma, he's got the leadership, he's got the smarts. He needed to be leader of this team, and it made perfect sense, and I'm so glad they went this route.
Specifically, at one point, Calder says, "You were born to lead this team," to Robin. And that's the nod to the future. We know that's going to happen.
Yep, and it's the nod to the fans. It's them painting it red. It's them saying, we know we made this change, and we hope you understand why we made this change. It makes sense to us in this show. We're not going to leave you hanging. Mm-hmm. We recognize that Dick is a fan favorite and has been for 75 years. Stick with us and let us show you what we got. But we're going to give you Dick leading this team. I love it. I just freaking love it.
And this also brings up how cool Calder is.
I love him.
I'll admit, I was not the biggest fan of Aquaman in my younger days. I didn't understand who the character was. And in older generations, a lot of times Aquaman wasn't given his due. In the past few years, as I've been getting back into comics, as I've been reading different things, I've just seen how cool Aquaman can really be. I was not originally the biggest fan of the New 52 arc in DC, but then I read more of it, and I freaking love it. And that opening chunk with Aquaman showing up and being just brilliant and awesome and powerful, that alone won me over to the character. There's a point in the Injustice story arc where Aquaman says enough and literally just attacks the entire planet. Yeah. It's so cool.
Absolutely.
The realization of who Aquaman really is at his roots is just amazing. So many more modern, more current storylines are doing cool things. He can still be goofy and silly. I mean, Batman the Brave and the Bold, they made him just a total goofball, but I still loved him. I absolutely adored him.
That show, that Batman Brave and the Bold was way better than it ever should have been. That was a good series for sure.
The musical episodes, Chill of the Night, I believe is one of the best pieces of animated storytelling ever.
Let's not get on too much of a side tangent, because then I'm going to want to start a Brave and the Bold show.
I'm just going to shut you down right now. We're not doing another podcast. So Calder, for me, is evolving into this character that I really, really like. I didn't have the background of knowing who he was in the Aquaman lore, so I'm not coming at it like you are, Rich.
Let me stop you right there, because he didn't exist.
Well, there you go.
This Calder, this Aqualad, the original Aqualad was a character named Garth. He was terrible. He was part of the original Teen Titans, but he was all of the thing. He was like Aquaman less. worse than any of the other characters were. This Calder was created for the TV show, but he became so popular that they folded him into and informed a character that did show up in the DC Comics universe. So this character was fresh for all of us, and we're going to do a bonus episode on all the main characters, and Calder deserves an entire episode. So I don't want to get into it too much here, but this is an episode that really pushed it over the edge. Calder is hands down my wife's favorite character in this show, and as it goes into season 2 with Calder's arc, it is so amazing. Let's move on to some next stuff though, because there's too much to talk about.
Absolutely. So let's go over to a little bit about McGann. Of course, the Bioship is awesome.
Still amazing in this episode. Again, reinforces that it's the perfect thing for this team. But I need to talk about the mind link that ends up coming up, because their radios get jammed at some point, and of course Calder is like, McGann, link us up. And Superboy's not happy about it, but he's like, yeah, I'm here, right? It's okay. I get it now. I trust her enough. So that's fine. And it works out well. But the thing is, it's the same thing with the dialogue. It's the same thing with the Spanish. Through the rest of the series, the team has a secret language. They have entire scenes in which they don't animate their mouths moving at all. They're entirely having a telepathic conversation. In fact, later on, Zatanna calls them out on it and says, are you guys talking telepathically? And the rest of us can't hear you? Because either that's super cool or really rude, right? But it happens so much in the show, and it's so perfect. It would happen in a tabletop game. It would happen in a comic. We wouldn't think twice about it. But to do it in an animated series, it reminds me of that classic Buffy episode, Hush, where nobody can talk. And they do an entire TV show episode where no one says anything. People were telling Joss Whedon, you're insane. That can't be done. You don't do that on TV. And he did it, and it was horrifying, and it was awesome, right? It's the same kind of echoes here, that extra depth of thought about not just the story, but how to animate it and what to choose to animate, and more importantly, what to hold back on and what not to animate.
And I also love that this is where we're starting to see a little bit more of the dynamic between Connor and McGann start to develop.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We saw that at the very end of last episode. Now we're coming into a little bit more of things are starting to change and move in the right direction. I'll tell you, going back a second to the whole Mind Link thing, watching the rest of the series to the extent that I have, this episode where they're still using comms felt so weird.
It did, right? I was like, why are they on their comms? That's a terrible idea.
Right. And then all of a sudden, it's because it hasn't happened yet. Okay.
Right.
This is the episode where it happens. So that was just a weird thing. But it's fun to see the evolution of it. And the fact that it's just Calder saying, all right, I'm the leader. McGann, do it. We need to move forward. He's so decisive. He's so instrumental in making the team be the team.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's move on here, man. So Sportsmaster, I'm just going to say something quick, because once again, of all the villains in this show, there'll be a couple of bonus episodes. Sportsmaster's definitely getting one. This, oh my gosh, I will just say, so he is an update of a terrible villain from the 40s who was good at sports. He literally walked around like a baseball outfit. Sometimes he had a golf outfit on. In a way, he was like a lame Casey Jones from TMNT, right? He'd have like a golf club bag with hockey sticks and stuff in it. For the time, it made sense. He was actually a villain for Green Lantern, believe it or not, the Alan Scott Green Lantern, where his the magical ring that he used did not work on wood. So a Sportsmaster guy kind of made some sense. He's just terrible. And this is the most inspired modernization of a terrible villain I have seen since Batman the Animated Series made Mr. Freeze a horrifyingly relatable, heartbreaking villain. Unbelievable.
I'll admit, when I was first watching this episode, I didn't have the background to know who Sportsmaster was to begin with. And this guy just shows up in a hockey mask with sports equipment.
Oh, yeah.
What is going on?
I get it.
But then we see him do something so cool to identify him as a contender against the team. He sees Miss Martian in her camouflage.
Right. He's so perceptive, and his brain is working so quickly. He's constantly watching his surroundings and can see when something is not right. The first thing we get from him is Calder looking worried. Mm-hmm. He's like, Sportsmaster, we're in trouble, right? I'm like, what?
Right. Why is this dude in a husky mask giving the prince of the ocean cause to be worried?
And if you knew the history of Sportsmaster at the time, you'd be like, why are you even worried about Sportsmaster? The guy is terrible, right? And I really did, even at this point, thought he was just going to be some minor minion, but he plays such a major role across the first season in particular. And even in the second season, it's great.
Yeah, he has a huge story arc that develops. I think what I really enjoyed best about this episode, tying directly to Sportsmaster, we see him at the very end of the episode speaking to the light.
Yeah.
And we get this nice tie-in that, as a reminder, the light is still working behind the scenes. They have their agents out in the field.
But we still don't know who the light is. It's just a panel or a conglomeration of people we haven't seen, just heard.
Right. But I feel like the voices, as they are being revealed, are some of those nods to the true, deep, devoted fans as a challenge to who can figure it out first.
Yeah, and in this one, there's definitely one that jumped out at me, which made a lot of sense, and we can talk about that a little bit in the spoilers section. The last thing I want to talk about is just the teamwork at the end. Mm-hmm. This is the fight that Happy Harbor didn't have. Right? They play with our expectations. Superboy goes against Mammoth earlier, and it doesn't really work out. It's the kind of classic battle. And then they do what they should do. They switch up partners at the end. There's a great plan. McGann is subtle and sabotages the chopper, and Robin is going against Cobra and Shimmer, and it's just, I don't know, everything just worked so nicely, and they worked so well together as a team. And it really does hammer home the idea that Calder is the best leader of this team, but it also has to do with the writing. The writing was just so good and so tight, and to the point where Cobra probably could have taken the team, even though he was the only one left. They showed him being so competent, but he just pauses for a moment, realizes he's smarter than that. He knows, well, everything I was doing here is done. No reason to fight. I'm good. Another time. And he steps away. And normally that might bug me, except it all was written so well, it made sense.
And on top of that, I really love that this is Calder's plan.
Mm-hmm.
There's that moment when they're in the collapsed mine shaft where they finally decide that Calder is the leader. He lays out the plan. That's this tactically really sound, strong plan. But again, we don't see that.
Right.
We don't see him having the conversation. We don't see him saying, all right, you go do this, you go do that.
Right.
It just happens.
Right.
And from a storytelling standpoint, that's really, really strong.
And this is the kind of point, they open up this fight, and Mammoth sees Superboy for the second time and growls at him or whatever, and Superboy says, go again. And Mammoth charges at him because that's Mammoth's expectation. Let's do this, right? But then Calder hits Mammoth with a powerful water stream and then electrifies Mammoth. And Superboy just laughs. He's just not the plan, buddy. And then he moves on to go do something else. And it just made him feel like the team was happy to work together. We have a plan and this is working and I'm happy with what we're going to be doing together. And this all makes sense, right? When Superboy catches Miss Martian and then she just lifts her hand up and she's got the detonator because she has stealthed into the chopper with all of the Cobra Venom and put all the explosives in it. It's just these great moments. And Superboy grins again. They're we got this. We're doing what we're supposed to be doing. This is great. Except that they totally aren't, and Batman is pissed.
Another really tiny, tiny minor detail that just appeals to me. When they change their costumes into stealth mode.
Yeah, absolutely.
That just makes me happy. I love that.
Yeah.
I also love the fact that Robin doesn't.
Because he's already stealth mode.
Because he's so good at what he does.
Right.
He can run around in muted, but still red and yellow.
Right.
And still be the best ninja on the team.
Exactly.
Let's get into the ending scene with Batman's debrief.
Yeah.
I know you've got some good thoughts about this one.
Yeah, this was great because you're riding this high with the team at the end of this big fight. They won against crazy odds. Bane, now that we know that Sportsmaster is absurdly competent, right? Bane, Sportsmaster, Cobra, who just takes Robin down without even breaking a sweat. They stop all of this stuff, and you're really excited for them. But here are the consequences. Unlike other shows, or even in the comics, they've caused a lot of carnage. They've blown up a facility. They've caused a lot of damage. And it was supposed to be you were like, oh yeah, whoops, this was supposed to be a covert mission. right? They were supposed to scout the place out, but it just didn't work out that way. And so at the end, Batman's like, this was terrible. You were all getting written up for your multiple mistakes of what you did, until then, good job.
And there's a beat there. There's a beat where you actually feel that crashing emotion, but then of the team itself, and then you're brought back up as he says, good job.
Yes. And you're confused and the team's confused and this is also the moment that took this Bruce Greenwood voiced Batman to where I wanted him to be. Because he's going to tell them what they did wrong and what they needed to do right to do the mission he sent them to. But he also recognizes that, and I quote, no battle plan survives first contact with the enemy. How you adjust to the unforeseen is how you determine success. And how you determine who leads determines character. And this was a huge, huge moment where you get a shot of Calder and Robin, and Robin smiles. Because he knew that he did what he should have done. Right? He knew he did kind of what Batman wanted him to do. He could have been leader. If that would have worked out, that's fine. But he was proud that Batman was proud that Robin didn't let his arrogance and his more experience in the field make him push to be leader. And he stepped aside for the person who should lead. I was happy and Robin was happy. And it made the fanboy in me happy that my Robin was still, that this Dick Grayson was still the character I wanted him to be, even though he didn't happen to be leader. He was still, the heart of that character was alive. And I loved it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we could just keep gushing about how much we liked this episode a lot.
Yeah, let's move on.
I don't think either of us really has any major dislikes. I know there's one point you want to make a little bit later, but I think we need to transition here into our Canary debrief for the story.
Stick around. Class is in session.
Yeah, I nodded to a little bit of this, so I'm just going to revamp it just a little bit. It's about keeping the heart of a character. If you're going to change a character, this is the thing that bothers me when we're talking about a movie, and Caleb and I are going to disagree on this a little bit, but when you're talking about a movie like Man of Steel or Batman vs. Superman or the Green Lantern movie, the problem with these movies, when people complain about them not being good or they don't care about them, the first complaint is, it's not like the comics, so people don't like it because it's not like the comics. This is, anytime anybody says that, they're clearly don't understand comic fans. These characters have changed and evolved over 80 plus years. We see the 60s Batman is not the 80s Batman, is not the 21st century Batman. These have entirely evolved. We get changing characters, but what we don't like is when the heart of a character is massively changed and flipped. And in this case, Robin is the example of this. I mentioned it before. Just because Robin's a leader, I'm not going to be pissed that he's not the leader just because it's not like the comics. I'm going to be pissed if you make Robin something that Robin is not. If you're going to make the Dick Grayson Robin something that Dick is not, right? In this case, they've even changed him up from the comics as well. He's a computer hacker. Dick isn't the computer hacker Robin. That's Tim in the comics. To make him a modern Robin, it would be weird if he wasn't a computer hacker, right? And it works for this character. So that's already a small change. They did the same change in Batman the Animated Series with Dick, was also a mash of Tim in Batman the Animated Series. And then they skipped Jason in Batman the Animated Series. And the Tim from the Batman Animated Series was more of a mash of Jason and Tim because he was kind of streetwise and that kind of stuff. Because they had to for the storyline, because they had already made some choices they had to adapt to. And this is the same way, right? It's the exact same thing. As long as the heart of the character is good, you can tweak whatever you want. You can make Dick Grayson a girl. I don't care, right? That doesn't matter. The way that it was set up was that Robin was already not trained to be part of a team, and it had been nodded that Calder was, the apprentice to Aquaman, who is a leader of people. All of this makes perfect sense for this. But what can we learn from this, right? Don't take the expected route if it doesn't fit with the story you're telling. If you're telling your story with established characters, you need to figure out what the heart of the character is and stick to it. Dick Grayson is still a brilliant, charismatic, martial arts, acrobat, gadgeteer. The core of the character didn't change. The fact that he's not a leader is irrelevant, right? And we're going to see this in the next episode too, right? So the brilliant example of this is in episode 5, which is called Schooled. And we'll talk about this deep character development, particularly in Superman. where he does not act the way that we expect, yet the heart of that character is still present. If you aren't creating stories with established characters, please, please, please try not to accept the first idea that comes to mind. It is typically the cliche thing, and that's okay, but then you go to the second idea and the third idea. Usually those are pretty cliche too. When you get to the fourth, fifth, or sixth ideas, when you're thinking deeper and taking the time and taking a breath and really looking at your ideas, those are the levels of ideas that you get to where you're taking those cliches and you're adding layers to them and you're turning them on their ear for your stories, whether it's from your role-playing game at your table, making your villains deeper, not just evil, writing your novel, whatever it happens to be. Please think about it and put some extra thought into it. Don't just grab the first thing.
And just to wrap all that up, I think that this episode is a brilliant example of showing the development of these characters very quickly.
Yes.
It starts with everyone being very separate and individual. There's a moment of unification, and then everyone comes together at the end. So I think this is a perfect example of how to effectively shift the tone of that story when you define that leader and then you define unity around them and bringing everybody in line. And it wasn't just someone saying, I'm the leader, I'm in charge, you're going to do this. The leader is demonstrating his leadership skill. He is showing us why he should be in charge, and he's earning that right. As viewers, we're not these characters, right? We are not Robin, who knows Calder and has worked with him, but isn't following him. We're just seeing this guy say, all right, I'm the leader, I'm going to take control. Right. He then demonstrates to us, the viewers outside of this fake reality, why he should be the leader.
They are showing, not telling. Absolutely. 100%.
And that is really what makes this such a great episode. I think this is the episode that redeemed your worry, Rich, from the last.
It definitely, I will quote Vandal Savage. 1 time is an incident. 2 times is coincidence. 3 times is enemy action. So the pilot was great. 2nd episode not so good. 3rd episode fantastic. And then I think that's why episode 5, Schooled, sits with me as one of my favorite episodes, is because I finally realized, okay, now we have 3 solid episodes where they are really taking this someplace else, and we're going to talk about that in the next episode.
Absolutely. So
let's crash the mode, man.
Tell us something we don't know yet.
Sorry, BB. We can't risk altering the time stream. We do that, we're all feeling the mode.
Spoiler alert. If you do not want to know what's happening before you watch the episode, stop listening and come back a little bit later.
Or the series. We pretty much talked about the episode, but the rest of the series anyway.
A lot of what happened in this, I don't see it as a direct big surprise spoiler. There's a lot of foreshadowing still.
I think there is. I think there's a lot of nods. Honestly, I almost get to the point where I think that Happy Harbor should just be ignored. And this is the episode that makes them a team, right? The first episode, Happy Harbor really kind of introduces Miss Martian's powers and things, but there's just nothing critical that happens in that episode that can't happen here. Mm-hmm. That's my thought. I don't know if I'd go so far as to say that you didn't need Happy Harbor at all, but it kind of was pretty close.
This episode is definitely about strengthening the relationship to the larger DC universe, like we saw in Independence Day and Fireworks, bringing up Bane, Cobra, Sportsmaster. These are all nods to the larger world that the team is only just encountering.
And we find out later on, I mean, Sportsmaster at first I was like, well, that's interesting, but he's just going to be some minion guy. You know what? Then they start introducing Artemis. And they introduce Cheshire, and they introduce these other characters that are directly tied to Sportsmaster, and so many other things that happen. As we mentioned in the first episode's Crashing the Mode, yeah, Roy's the clone spy, and Sportsmaster's his handler. So he's the one who, every time he shows up and sees Roy, he gets information from him, and it's just so well done.
I like that even though this is the first time we're seeing Sportsmaster, there is no acknowledgement of Roy in this episode.
No acknowledgement. Yes,
there's
absolutely.
not even a wink or I know what's going on from Sportsmaster. This is just saying, here's Sportsmaster. He's working with the light. Move on.
Yeah.
It's a great way to build the story.
Right.
To layer in the fact that this larger mystery and conspiracy is in fact there. But if we're watching it through the very first time, we don't know that yet.
Yeah. And that actually brings in your comment about the light. Sportsmaster gets away. He only has one ampule of the Cobra Venom. And he tells that to the light, I only got this one ampule. And then this very heavily French accented voice comes on as one of the light members saying, you know, well, it perhaps can be reverse engineered. And I'm like, oh my goodness, that's the brain. Right? So they have like, there's these screens on the wall and they're kind of backlit or whatever with these bright lights. So you can only see the vague outline of who these people are. And everybody else looks mostly like people, but they focus in on the screen of the person speaking French and it's just a dome. So it was clearly the brain, who is again, the brain in Monsieur Mallah is our classic Teen Titans villains. So it's nice to see them in there, but he sounded so serious and like, I was like, okay, this isn't going to be a goofy brain for the most part. This is going to be maybe more like the comic brain, who's a little bit horrifying. He can be written horrifying and not as entirely as a joke, as much as a brain in a jar cannot be a joke. But yeah, that was the hint of like, oh, okay, who are these other people then? Right? Are these the big players? Is this going to be like, there's so many of them. I was like, who is this team? Like, maybe Lex or like Raish or somebody, but like there's like 7 or 8 people on these screens and I can't figure out who they are.
Yeah, that is a fun mystery to learn as the show moves on. I think the only other thing to bring up here is possibly the only thing that was a little disappointing is Cobra.
Yeah. The Cobra Venom shtick was interesting, but it only comes up a couple more times in the series and doesn't actually play into the Light's plans that much. Even though they get that Cobra Venom and they reverse engineer it and it shows up in a couple more episodes, it's not like they made an army of super soldiers and that was part of their plan. So I think in rewatching, it's the only thing that kind of disappointed me a little bit was that it wasn't as tightly woven into the finale as so many of the other storylines were.
I agree. I do like the one episode where it specifically pops up again.
Yeah.
But we'll get there. So consider that your teaser for down the road. I will also consider this mode thoroughly crashed in this episode. Yes. Why don't we get to some fan service here, Rich, and put a bow on it?
Yeah, sounds good. I have another AMV for this fan service. I'll go ahead and give a spoiler warning ahead of time. If you go watch this AMV, it is a major spoiler for the end of season 2 in it. It's really a Nightwing tribute, but they use a lot of Young Justice footage. It's called Exit Wounds. It's the song Exit Wounds. And it really shows the long history of loss and pain in Dick Grayson's life. And another little bit of a spoiler, between season 1 and season 2, we have a little bit of a time lag between season 1 and season 2 of Young Justice. We'll get into that a little bit later. But things happen in between those 2 seasons that they don't directly address. And in the second season, you will see that there was another Robin who died. He's in a graveyard scene, basically. We'll get into that. But that Robin is Jason Todd. And for those of you who don't know Jason Todd's history, he was the second Robin. And he was murdered by the Joker in a fantastic, well, I thought it was fantastic because I hated Jason Todd back in the day. I actually was one of those people who spent 50 cents and called in and voted to have Jason killed. So if you like Jason, there you go.
Wow.
Oh, I hated Jason.
We just learned so much about Rich right now.
He was so not Dick Grayson. And I've already mentioned I may like Dick Grayson a bit. And you know what? In my defense, he wasn't handled very well as a character back in the day. His modern retake with Under the Red Hood and that kind of stuff is actually very, very cool. So I like Jason more now because he feels more like him appropriately. He wasn't a good Robin. He's a good Jason Todd. So if you haven't seen that or you don't know that story, this AMV actually shows that scene from the animated movie Under the Red Hood. So you can get a glimpse of that because it's a nod to the fact that Jason was Dick's only brother at that time because they were both adopted by Bruce. And it's something that it never really hit me until I saw this Exit Wound video and I was like, holy crap, I never really thought about that. Dick's entire family died. And then when Jason got adopted, it was his brother, and his brother was murdered by Joker. And how did Dick feel about that? And that kind of thing. It's really interesting. Also, it gives us some nods to Dick's relationship with Barbara, aka Batgirl, and that kind of thing. It's a really, really well done video. So we'll have a link to that in the show notes and on the website.
And of course, for our fan service, we want to involve you, the fans of this podcast and Young Justice, Teen Titans in general. So if you have anything you would like us to share, something cool you found, something cool you created, please get a hold of us. Email me, whelmedpodcast@gmail.com. We'll have a chat. We'll put something together. And I think, unless you have a wonderful final word for us, Rich, we might be done with episode 3.
Hashtag keep binging YJ. Go on Netflix and keep watching Young Justice. Watch it over and over again. Get those numbers up so Netflix remembers that we are still interested in getting that season 3.
Absolutely. That is the best thing you can do to get us more Young Justice. So, with all that being said, I think Drop Zone is fully discussed here. I hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you for listening to episode 3 of Whelmed. Thank you so much for your time. For Rich and myself, see you next week.
Stay whelmed.
You've been listening to Whelmed, the Young Justice Files podcast. Our computer is voiced by Madison Ray. Our theme was composed by Emily Mio. Our logo was created by Kevin Bates. Whelmed is a fan-made podcast and is not officially affiliated with DC Comics, DC Entertainment, Warner Brothers Animation, and any other owners of Young Justice or its related source material. As such, these companies have sole ownership of all symbols, images, names, logos, and proprietary material related to Young Justice. Original content of this podcast is ours under Creative Commons. Thanks for listening, and stay whelmed.